Please welcome our panellists, Acting Chief Executive Officer of SABIC, Abdulrahman Al-Fageeh, Chief Executive Officer of Exshore, Jenny Keisu, Founder and Chief Executive Officer of the Ocean Cleanup, Boyan Slat, Co-founder and Co-Chief Executive Officer of Allbirds, Joseph Zwillinger, and our moderator, anchor for Bloomberg Television, Francine Lacqua.
Hi, everyone. We have this very small topic about the circular economy. I mean, how big is the waste? Let's get straight to it, because we have 40 minutes to try and figure out how 2.7 million tonne of floating gyre of debris choking off ocean life in the Pacific can be resolved. So we talk about the circular economy, we talk about recycling, and of course everything in between. So thank you so much to our all-star panel for joining us. So let me start with you. And I'm really looking forward to the panel because you all have different experiences. You all have different parts of the economy that you're trying to fix. What does this all mean for SABIC? You're a big chemicals company. How do you see this? And actually, when did you start thinking about the circular economy?
First of all, thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for Bloomberg. I mean, to give us the opportunity to be among, distinguished, panelists here. We are not only a big company in chemicals, we are also a big company in sustainability. Actually, SABIC has been, established in 1976 as a sustainable company to collect all the flare gases that used to come with the oil and convert this into petrochemical products that we are seeing right now. So, like many years back, in our history, that we have a target for us in our sustainability. And part of it is we need to be zero carbon emission by the 2050. And we were believing in the circular economy, and the circular economy would have a major contribution in that zero carbon emission or carbon neutrality by the 2050. And we adopted what we call it the 4R roles, right, which is reduce, reuse, remove, and recycle. And we adopted programs for each one of them to make sure that we are reduce our emissions on an annual basis, and also we are removing it, and we are having a lot of alliances with a lot of waste management companies around the world to make sure that it is removed, and also it be reused. And also we adopted, new technologies and trying to find out what is the best solution that we use this recycled material into a feedstock as original material.
Jenny, what are you seeing in the oceans?
So just to take a step back from our perspective, so Exshore is committed to net zero boating. That entails that our high-performing electric boats that are out there already should not emit anything. But it also needs to be built out of 100% sustainable materials. It needs to be manufactured in a sustainable way. And then, of course, they should end up one way or another recycled or reused, etc. So this is a huge focus. And what we need is collaborators, because we will be building the first 100% net zero electric boat by 2030, and the technology is not yet there. So we need to collaborate with our full supply chain to get there all the way, and that's our current focus.
Boyan?
Yeah, so at the Ocean Cleanup, our mission is to rid the world's oceans of plastic, and we do that by cleaning up what's already in the ocean. So as we sit here, every 10 seconds, an area the size of a football field is being cleaned in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And we also try and stop more plastic from going into the ocean. So what we found is that 1,000 rivers emit about 80% of all the plastic going to the ocean. So by tackling those 1,000 most polluting rivers, we think we can have a major impact on the inflow. We're now in 10 rivers, but of course hope to scale up in the coming years. Joey?
So we've thought of it as part of a system, and first of all, we make shoes. They're the most comfortable shoes in the world. Hopefully be the last commercial I make, but it's allbirds.com or wherever you live. But we've set out, very similar to Jenny, when we started the company, we wanted to be an alignment around our purpose and our financial outcomes. So that is driving down carbon so that we can help reverse climate change, and doing that while making money. So if people buy our shoes, they're making a smart trade on whatever else they can buy. And the way that we've done this is to narrow it down to a singular metric that can be digested by consumers. And that is the carbon emissions for the full life cycle of the product, from farm in our case, all the way to the end of life. And if you get that score, and I took a run this morning, and I knew I was speaking, so I counted up the carbon on my clothes and my shoes. And we're all Allbirds stuff, and we label every single item with the carbon score. And so I had 24.7 kilograms of carbon dioxide emission equivalent in all of my garments: underwear, socks, shorts, shirts, shoes. And we have a plan to get that down to 0. And that will then drive this innovation, and you cannot get to 0 if you're using virgin synthetics. And so we think about the inputs as the absolute most single high-impact priority that we can possibly do. And if we're driving that down to 0, it's going to force really interesting innovations. And so these shoes that I'm wearing now, it's our latest material that we've launched. It's a leather made out of exclusively plant oils with no plasticizers in it. Most of the alternatives to leather have a lot of plastic in it. And so this will biodegrade when you're done with it. And thinking about that overall system and driving that to 0 ends up solving, if everyone kind of got on board, reducing the plastics. That doesn't mean that it's going to help eliminate them from the ocean, from the mess we've already made, but that's the way we think about it.
But it's also, Boyan, so so we've carefully selected the panel, of course, for people that believe and are trying to make a difference. But have you ever met a chief executive that says, actually, I don't care about this, I want to pollute more? And so how do you match up the two? Can you see who's polluting the most at the bottom of the oceans?
I mean, we do see certain brands on the plastic that we take out, of course. You only see, of course, the consumer goods companies, not the companies further down or further up in the supply chain. But I think companies, as a good friend of mine, Mark Benioff, always says, business is the greatest agent for change, and there's tremendous power in companies that can be used, good or bad. And I think companies have, with their own supply chain, a huge opportunity to do tremendous good, and that's why we also at the OceanClaim don't shy away from working with companies, because if that allows us to have a greater positive impact on the world, I think that's actually a very good thing.
Abdulrahman, when you look at the circular economy, of course, it's the idea that you trade up, right? You make a product that's higher value. Why is that more appealing than recycling? It's more expensive to do.
Yeah, definitely, but it's the recycled material that we are working on in SABIC, that we need to do a chemical recycling. What do I mean by this? It's not the mechanical one that it goes to, the secondary, applications and etc. It has to go back to the process itself to have the high end that goes to medical application, healthcare, automotive, aerospace application that really give a premiums for this. So we are working at technology right now that we can take all these waste plastics back to the original process, and it can go in the process as the original material. So this is one thing. The second thing, it also reduce our carbon emission. The more that you take out of this waste plastic, that means that you reduce the fresh material that you are going to use. By reducing this, you definitely you reduce your carbon footprint. And we put in 2019 a baseline for us in SABIC that we need to reduce by the 2030 20% of our footprint. And we start doing this. And we start doing the recycling. We start doing, a lot of, what I call it self-funded investment within our plants to improve our operation and our operational excellence, to make sure that the emission is as low as we can. And I'm pleased that by the end of 2021, we have reduced 10% from the 2019 baseline, which is give us the confidence that by 2030, we are going to go to 20%, and hopefully also by the 2025 to be neutral.
Yeah. Jenny?
Yeah, I think one thing that is important is, of course, we need to do this because by 2050 we will need 3 planets to sustain our current way of living. But it's also fair to point out that, we do make money out of this, and this will continue to be the driver. Of course, all of us want to save the planet, but investors need the return, etc. And one of the important things to realize is that there's so much new technology, so you can actually utilize this. So, for example, we have a large-size factory in Stockholm where we build our boats. When we moved in-house the production of the hulls, which is in essence the plastic we have, we reduced the amount of plastics that we had to use by 50%. That is a cost saving of 50%. I mean, this is huge from a financial perspective as well, and I think that needs to be pointed out. That, I mean, reducing waste, reducing plastic, that is a huge upside. When we installed the ply cutting machines, we reduced the waste from 50% in manufacturing to less than 10%. And this goes directly to your bottom line. So, I mean, this is also a reason why people should be doing it as companies.
Jerry, what kind of technology do you need actually to, I guess, help?
To get to our targets, we think we largely have the technology that we need. We've invested in a couple companies to get it done. I will say that it may not be particularly popular in a circularity panel, but I would say that recycling synthetics and doing work to either downcycle them, which is typically the case with most polymer systems, at least when you're using polyester, the second time you use it, it's really not even close to as good. So it is not the direction that's going to work. So I would suggest the situation we're in now and why your work's so important is we have to look at it more like a turnaround situation. Like you look in a business that's really struggling, you have a mess that you got to clean up, but you need to fundamentally change the way that you're doing business. And so
that's hard.
It is hard, and that's where I do think that where I said it's difficult. I think in the chemical industry, which correct me if I'm misstating, but it's in a situation where there's a price taker from the co-products of fuel production, and on the other end, if it's a commodity, you also kind of sit there and take price, whatever the customer is going to pay on the commodity market. So it's difficult for a chemical company that's sitting as an intermediary to fully bear the burden of the change that needs to happen. So I do think this is where the real partnership needs to come in. And Marie earlier on a panel, I thought, alluded to some really good legislation that's coming out around carbon intensity of various products. So if we actually start to have companies like ours and Jenny's bear the burden of these externalities that are being pushed onto society, and really it's companies that exist out there right now that are privatizing the profits and socializing all these risks. So if we're going to do this turnaround situation, we do need to clean up the mess because we have a big problem, but we also need to fundamentally change who's bearing the cost of these problems. Eventually, it needs to be the consumer, and that needs to be guided by really smart policy based on energy intensity, and that will force plastics out of the ecosystem.
Abdulrahman?
I think forcing the plastic to be out of the system, I think this is something that it needs to be debated a lot. But I tell you the problem is in the waste management of the plastic. There is no proper understanding and awareness of the public and how to, get rid of the plastic when they use it, especially for the, single-use plastic, because others can be used for many years. But the single-use plastic, it has to have an appropriate, awareness and education to the people how to really, how to manage it well. And that need a lot of collaborations from governments, from NGOs, from producers, suppliers, supply chain. Everybody has a responsibility in order to make sure that this is not end up in ocean. Now we are talking about when it is in ocean, how can we clean it up? Okay, this is the reaction to the problem that it happens. So we should go to the root cause of the problem. Root cause of the problem, there is no inappropriate, management for the waste plastic. There are some countries or regions, like in Europe, for example, I think they do. They do some incentives for the people on how to have appropriate, waste management for the single use, like bottles and etc. But in other parts of the world, hardly that you see these incentives to people how to, manage this waste. So this is the problem. We start from the root cause and the waste management. Then in the cleanup, we are all, collaborating here, and I think we are doing a good job, in trying to clean this and trying to remove it and reuse it and recycle it, as I have mentioned in my starting statements here. But that takes time, of course. And definitely also by reducing the carbon emission, I mean, that contribute and help into the circular economy for sure.
But Boyan, what's the right? So we heard about incentives. What would actually make a real difference? Is it incentives? Is it punishment? Is it legislation? Is it simple, data transparency?
Yeah, I think it's to build on what the two of you just said. I do agree. Waste management is fundamentally the most important thing to prevent more plastic from going to the ocean. Right now, the order of 400 million tons of plastic is being produced every year. What we see from our data, we published this in Science last year, is that roughly between 1 and 2 million tons of plastic is actually flowing into the ocean, which is somewhere between 1/4 and 0.5%. So most of the plastic actually does not end up in the ocean. So, and where it's being emitted, that's mostly in densely urbanized areas close to the ocean in middle-income countries where people have enough wealth to consume stuff wrapped in plastic, but there's no public infrastructure yet to then collect the waste and put it in a safe place. However, of course, the problem is that waste management is quite expensive. Estimates vary, but it's somewhere between $600 billion and $1 trillion a year, which governments are spending on an annual basis to collect waste. So obviously, if the incentive structure is different for governments all the way to the consumer, I think that can really drive adoption of waste infrastructure as well as then making use of that infrastructure.
But that's what private-public partnerships. Again, how do you make sure that it has teeth, that whatever's put in place will be followed and it's just not an incentive?
Yeah. So just to name an example, so one river where we have our machines in to collect plastic is pretty close to here. It's the River Klang in Malaysia. Now, that river used to emit more plastic in a day than the biggest river in Europe does in a year. Now, in fact, there's more plastic being consumed in Europe than in Malaysia, but of course the big difference is the quality of the waste infrastructure. So public investments in that infrastructure, I think, is really the single most important thing.
Yeah, how do you deal with textiles, Joey?
From what perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about single-use plastics, but there's also a concern about textiles. Like, what are some of do you share technology, for example, with I don't know if there's a global textile?
Yeah, textiles, I mean, they do contribute a ton to the plastic pollution, of course, given that most of them are from polyester in the way we make it. And I guess one of the things to maybe go back a little bit and answer your question at the same time, I think the idea of plastics doesn't necessarily have to be negative, but I do think shifting from plastics from petroleum to plastics from other green sources is going to be a frontier that really helps. And so you offered up a great question. Maybe you did great research. But the bottoms of our shoes are made from one of Abdulrahman's competitor partners in Brazil called Braskem. And they take the waste stream from sugarcane production. We've co-developed this with them to put it into a green ethanol, then ethylene, and we take it and make a foam out of it. And so when doing that partnership with Braskem, we were too small to really rationalize an investment of many millions of dollars for them to connect their reactors in their plant in southern Brazil. So we said, let's do this. We'll strike a good business deal between us. We'll make the investment, and then we'll open source this to the rest of the industry. And so the idea there is we can compete vigorously for market share against all the other players in shoes, but we can collaborate when it comes to sustainability. And if we're successful doing that, there's a really nice win-win situation, particularly way upstream at this really capital-intensive end of the value system. When you're talking about building block chemicals, the capital intensity is way too high for someone in apparel making textiles or making shoes to bear that burden again. So collaborating across the industry is a vital aspect for, I think, how we need to make this recipe work.
Are they more expensive? at the end of the day for the
Sometimes.
moment, and then they'll go down in price?
I mean, one of the beauty, if you take a long-term view, is it's based on a completely different feedstock. So it's based on sugarcane pricing and ethanol pricing, which is, of course, always tied to petroleum, as pretty much every commodity is. But it can be counter-cyclical. So sometimes we're paying less, sometimes we're paying more. And as more companies buy this green EVA, the foam that we make the shoes with, the price does come down dramatically. And so that we see a time when we can pay parity. For the moment right now, oil has come down significantly, and that has also made the gap a little bit more extreme.
What are you most excited in the technological
I'm
space?
excited about, the bio-based products, plastics. I think I'm not against anything here, but I think we need to look, deeply and analyze whether these bio-based products, is it better that we convert it and direct it into the food, into the human needs, rather than industry? I mean, it could be both. We could have mixed, but is this the solution? I think there is more needs for these bio products. I think somewhere else that could has priority in the humanity life.
But how difficult, again, and Jenny, I know you probably think about this a lot, how difficult is it to have technology now that works, that is sustainable, and then you realize 3-4 years that actually it had second and third round effects that are bad for the environment?
So if we look at what we need to get done, we will consume as long as we live on this planet. So we need to provide people with better products at the same price, and they need to be sustainable. So net zero is a key here, right? And it's not too far out. We just launched our second model, which is actually price parity, not including TCO, but just price parity. That's what we need to provide. It needs to be much better experience that it is already. We got the prize in Europe last year we came in second in Powerboat of the Year. We're electric, we're 3 years old. Right, so you have that. But what is tricky is the net zero part. You need to collaborate a lot. We have tons of collaborations out with different people and companies already where we will get biocarbon fiber not too far out. We will very soon announce something about that. And bioglass fiber. You need all of that. And this is technologies that just on the verge of being commercialized at the moment. And as long as we pull together and show that there is consumers here, we're willing to take this on, those companies can grow. So I think going forward, as long as we collaborate and work this out together, we will fix that. What we need from you, ask what we need in terms of legislation is similar. If you look at Norway, they managed to get to more than 50% electric car in a very, very short period because the government took away the value-added tax on those products because they want the transition to happen. We just need super small incentives, and going forward, we will fix this. On the other hand, Boyan's project, we need help there because, everything that has been already done, we can't fix the history. We can do it going forward, but countries need to help with the legacy.
So I am getting questions, so thank you so much for those. I just want to make actually a very short question to everyone. Can everyone raise their hands who think that in the last 5 years there's been a huge shift in consumer demand for the circular economy? Are people ready to pay more actually to make sure that it's sustainable? That's about 70% of the room. And Joe, you see this, right, in demand for your products. Has it increased as people understand and get behind the story?
I think so. We're trying to understand how it's quite nuanced. We survey all of our customers all the time, and now 50% or more in the top 3 reasons they're buying our product has something to do with sustainability. So it's clearly on their minds. Now, I would contend that at the point of sale, people are still making a trade-off primarily on the tangible benefits of a product, price, quality, all that. What we've started to see a shift to is consumers starting to begin their selection of any kind of purchase with a subset of companies that they believe aligns with their values. And so it's that consideration set that starts. You're even seeing it in our industry in footwear. Zalando in Europe does a nice job of allowing consumers to filter based on different sustainability criteria. So it's a great example of how consumers are pulling on, hey, I want something that is more sustainable or has good rights for workers or whatever it is the issue that they think is the most important. And then maybe if it doesn't meet their needs on the value, on the price and the other qualities, they'll then expand it and consider a bunch of different legacy companies. And
Jenny?
I actually don't agree 100% with this. So I think that if you look at our consumers, a few of them are super into sustainability, but very similar to when Tesla came out, we have tons of customers who just want a better product. It's better UX, UI, it's amazing acceleration. They don't care about the environment, but they want the coolest boat. So we see that as well. And I think, I mean, we've been talking all day about how we are maybe getting into a recession. You can debate whether it will happen, I mean, within months or within, I mean, a couple of years, but I mean, we are heading towards that. The only way is to produce better products at the same price, because I don't think that people will be willing to pay a too high premium just to go green, and we need everyone to switch very fast. So I think we will need to get to price parity.
Totally agree.
Abdulrahman, why are you making a lot of these efforts? Is it, where does the wanting to do better come from?
Look, I mean, we are a company that work from values. And those values, I mean, you know, push us and give us the energy to make sure that we do the best. We increase our efforts into the carbon emission reduction, increasing the circular economy. This is better for the humanity. And even though if it has cost us more, and I think, you know, at the end is going to bring the value for it, not only for us as an individual company, but I think for the total world. And I think we are part of the world, and that's why we need the collaboration from everyone in this. You know, the circular economy, definitely, it's going to be one of the solutions. The carbon emission reduction and the zero neutrality and the carbon neutrality is also a great solution. It's going to, you know, improve the climate change, definitely. It's going to resolve a lot of challenges that the world is facing. So when a company like ours is drive its, you know, objectives and its targets from a values that is going to help the whole world, I think this is the energy that's driving us.
Boyan, I think I have a question for you from the audience, which is how can we fix a microplastic problem? So how can you fix, you know, things that you can't see that we all know about, and how do we prevent and clean that up efficiently?
Sure. Yes, it's very hard to get the smallest pieces of plastic out of the environment. The good news is, though, that still in terms of mass, most of the plastic at this moment in the ocean is large stuff. About 92% of the plastic is still larger than 5 millimeters, which is the official definition as where microplastics start. And the way most microplastics get created that are in the ocean is actually by degradation from the larger object. So what we say is, you know, we can't fix, you know, 100%, so let's focus on the stuff that we can fix, and thereby we prevent the creation of, you know, 10 times, 100 times more microplastics in the future. So, yeah, but I think the best way there is really to prevent it.
Does anybody think that actually we've taken a step back in terms of thinking about sustainability or upcycling and circular economy because of the last 3 years? Jenny?
I think to some extent this has made it more clear. I mean, 3 years ago there were a lot of people still debating climate change in general. I think we're way past that now with, I mean, where we are in the world. I also think that, I mean, the UN has made it very clear now. They've declared that the survival of our species, and we're talking about humanity, that will ultimately depend on the survival of the ocean. I think everyone feels that it's super clear what we need to get done. But getting back to, I don't think that people will just go green if it costs more or something else. It needs to be market-driven, it needs to be better. And if you just, for example, change goes where money flows, right? So if you look at the investors, everyone knows, based on where we're heading, that we need to go circular. You can debate whether it will be 1.5. We're absolutely not tracking towards 1.5 degrees, much more than that. But even if it ends up 2, 3, 4 degrees, what will happen is that society will be circular. And already now you can see that there's tons of companies that won't survive in a circular economy because they don't have a circular business model. They don't have those kind of customers. So I think we will see a lot of stranded assets being companies that are not going towards net zero. So I think that this will... you see a lot of interesting initiatives from people in this room and others. It will be the companies driving these forwards. It won't be the politicians, unfortunately.
But how is the danger of greenwashing real? So unless we talk with the same data points, you talk about the circular economy, which is going to be very different from someone else in the audience.
So I think we need to measure a lot, and we need to make sure that you cannot greenwash from that perspective anymore. So, for example, what we did, we had an external auditor go through all the company, so Cicero Shades of Green. We're actually super proud that I believe we're the only manufacturing company in the world that are 100% dark green, which says you're 100% part of the new economy, because all the parts that we have that are not net zero or 100% clean manufacturing, that's because that technology isn't around today. And I think that we need to demand that people are more open with the data. I mean, how do you do that? And I mean, net zero is an amazing way of looking at it, because previously it was too tricky. I mean, what is carbon neutrality? And it's very tricky to look at that. But now we have the science-based targets. And I mean, if you look at net zero, that's very easy to relate to. Every company can relate to that at least.
How do we avoid greenwashing?
No, I want just to go back on the previous question you said. I mean, what we need to do, I think we need to adjust. I'm talking from manufacturing point of view, because this is the area that I come from. And I think we need to adjust what we are doing right now. Look back on everything that we do in our processes and make sure that we adjust everything, even in our investments. Anything that is not going to be sustainable long term, we should not do it. We should make sure in anything that we do, even though, I mean, I can understand that there is some, values that we need to be generated for our stakeholders in totality. So environment is one of our stakeholders. So we should consider this. We should consider the value that it comes to the environment as a stakeholder. So if we adjust our processes and make sure that everything that we do, even if it is a small modification or it is a big investments, or it is a major, crackers and derivatives of chemicals and petrochemicals, it has to be a sustainable. Long term, it has to be sustainable. It has to drive the neutrality in the carbon emission.
Joey, on greenwashing, how do you, but also your competitors, which may not be as green?
Yeah, I think the last two comments are really authentic, like clearly well-resourced plans to get down and reduce carbon. And I would just second the notion that having something that's an objective measure is incredibly important. And I do think, the pandemic, to your question, of course, there was an influx of packaging that was in everybody's faces immediately. And so I think there's a reaction to that. And so a lot of brands that face consumers are now starting to talk quite a lot about recycling and take-back programs and things that I don't generally think map back to authentic action or initiatives within the company. So I think we're at risk at the moment right now of a giant confusion. And you ask 10 people what sustainability means, and they'll give you 10 different answers. And so I do think we're at a moment right now where there is real risk of so much confusion that unless we can help standardize and push towards a level of objectivity, that we could get in trouble.
But Boyan, I guess, and that's a very valid point that we always need to remember. Do you see in general, because we're almost out of time, do you just see in general more support from what you're doing from maybe parts of the world or governments that you were not expecting it to come from?
Yeah, I think it's definitely increasing. You referenced the pandemic. I don't think that slowed down the general trend towards a more sustainable world. I do think that there's lessons there that, if you force things upon people, there are people that maybe say, I don't like this. So ultimately, I think, building towards a future that we do agree with rather than fighting against the things we don't agree with, I think that's something that anyone can be behind. And I think, the panelists and hopefully also the ocean cleanup are good examples of that.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Abdulrahman, Jenny, Boyan, and Joey.
Thank you.
Thank you.